Quran is the word of God, what would you say to me? What would you give? Is that one thing, or is that easy?
Sure. That's a very good question. And this is something which there's a lot of confusion about. So some Muslims, what they try and say is, well, the reason why the Quran's a miracle is because of the linguistic miracle, say. Or they'll say it's a miracle because of preservation or because of prophecies or these things. I give a slightly different answer, which I believe is more in line with Islamic orthodoxy, which is this. If we accept the idea that there is a creator, and if we accept the idea that just like you make a camera, you have a manual with it, it makes sense God sends a revelation. There's something that God sends, whatever it is. Then the reason why I would say the Quran is the truth is because God teaches you the Quran teaches you about God what you can arrive at even without the Quran. The fact that there's one God, the fact that God is the only one worthy of worship, the fact that there's right and wrong, and the fact that in this life, the purpose of our life is to love God, to put our hope and trust and fear in God. So I would say the message of Islam is the number one proof of Islam. But there's something very important here. If I was to try and prove to you Bernoulli's theorem, right, or some theorem in physics or hydraulics, I would give you a mathematical formula, right?
Yes.
Islam, the evidence for Islam doesn't work like that. It works from you having a sincere heart, and if you're sincere, God will give you guidance. This is our belief. So it's not just about an abstract proof. It's not just about an abstract or philosophical argument. Now, don't get me wrong, there are arguments for why the Quran is the word of God, philosophical arguments. There are arguments for God's existence. But the fundamental criteria in Islam for guidance is that you sincerely ask God for guidance and you look for guidance. So it's not just a philosophical gymnastics back and forth.
Okay, good. What would you say to, what would you say, for example, if I said, there's so many other religions out there, and it's difficult for me to pin down. There isn't enough. I'm almost 40 years old, and it's difficult for me to research all of these different faiths and stuff. Because I was speaking to a gentleman from Afghanistan before I spoke to you.
Yeah.
And the topic came up about tests. Is that this life is a test from God. And I mentioned to him that I don't feel like this first test is a fair test.
Right.
Because if I was born in Saudi Arabia, it's more than likely I would have been Muslim.
Right.
Not 100%, but more than likely.
Yes.
If I was born in India, it's more than likely I'd be Hindu. What do you say to that?
It's a very good point. That's a very good point. The way I would explain it, Jermaine, is this. Every single human being, we generally follow the religion of our forefathers. That's just a general point. However, the Quran, it doesn't teach us to follow the religion of our forefathers. It doesn't tell us that. The Quran says, reason and think for yourself. Reflect upon the creation. Do not follow your forefathers. Do not follow your society, your cultures, your passion. Follow your reason. And your reason is what will lead you to God. And a sincere heart is what is going to help you reach God. So you're absolutely right. Chances are, most of us in life, we follow the religion of our forefathers, but the Quran says don't do that. Now, another book we have you heard of this book, The Eternal Challenge? This book is evidence for why the Quran is the word of God. These are the logical arguments. But this is not including what I said earlier, which is you need to have a sincere heart. Because someone can read the arguments for why the Quran is the word of God. Ignore it. And you know this, right? Well, you know what's interesting, yeah? In life, if you catch a murderer, you catch a thief, you catch a rapist, or whatever, do you think they know what they're doing is right or wrong? Or is it that they don't know?
If you're, I looked into this recently, if you're like a psychopath, there's a part of the brain, I believe, that makes you more likely to be a psychopath, isn't there? They've looked into this, and these people, they lack empathy. So if you lack empathy, you're not going to feel like what you're doing is wrong. So I would say, does a rapist feel like what they're doing is wrong? I would say so, no. Or a serial killer, from a society perspective, they would think what they're doing is wrong. But inside, I don't think they feel like what they're doing is wrong.
I mean, some people are psychopathic, but majority of people that do criminal things or wrong things, they still know what is right and wrong.
Okay.
So you know when you have regret, you have people who go to jail, they regret what they did. So other than the psychopaths, most people, they know right and wrong. Even the people that do wrong, they know right and wrong. And the thing is, in Islam, deep down inside, we do know that this life is short. We know that there's a higher purpose of this life. And deep down in our most private thoughts, deep down within us, we do have the knowledge of God. This in Islam is the fitrah. Wow. You know about it.
I told you already.
Okay. What's your thoughts on the fitrah?
So I do know that there's actually science behind it.
Yes, there is as well. Yeah.
I think some people hypothesize that it might be due to evolution. I don't know if you disagree with that. That we're more likely to believe in humans are more likely to believe in supernatural explanations for certain. Stop me if I'm being wrong. In supernatural explanations to determine why things happen the way they do. Like, for example, back in caveman times, people thought thunderstorms were acts of God.
Yes.
Or floods were acts of God, stuff like that. These are all acts of God in their way of thinking. So you can the picture goes back to when men first started walking upright.
So you know about this. This is a very interesting point you raised. Darwinists normally give this answer. They say that belief in God is evolved. We evolved to believe in God. But the thing is, there's a few philosophical problems with that. Say me and you, we're both running in a forest, and the bear's gonna catch one of us and eat us. I stop to pray to God, you keep running. Who's more likely to survive?
I'm going to survive.
Why is that?
So, for me, there's no reason to believe if you're going to pray to God that the bear's going to stop, is that the bear's going to divert away from you and run towards me or not eat you. So, from practice, we know this it won't work. So.
Yeah. So from a Darwinian point of view,
the person that runs is more likely to survive than the person
if they're an atheist. Yeah. So if anything, the Darwinian explanation for the belief in God is very poor. They try and explain it, but they don't have good evidence. Now, there's another good book, and with Ali Dawa's permission, I'm going to give this to you because it's his book, but I'm sure he won't mind. This is known as Darwin and God, right? So in this book, basically, what Darwin says is that he believed in God even after he published The Origin of Species.
He stopped believing, didn't he?
Because of the problem of evil and suffering. It wasn't because of evolutionary theory. So he also says there's nothing in evolutionary theory which undermines the existence of God. These are his thoughts.
Okay, so evolution doesn't disprove God.
At all.
Certainly, 100%.
Good.
The problem with evolution, obviously, though, for a lot of theists, is that it undermines the creation story.
It can.
So Adam and Eve, so that we came from two people, which doesn't go with the evolution standpoint, does it?
But the thing is, what I do is I first establish why we believe in God, why we believe the Quran is true. Then there's a conflict between the human origin and what's in the Quran in terms of creation and what science is saying. And the way I would resolve that is I would say in the Quran, God says that Adam is a miracle like Jesus is a miracle. Now I'm going to ask you a question, Jermaine, right? If Jesus was alive today and he's walking around, okay, and we took out his DNA, scientists, would they say he came from a virgin birth or would they say he's a normal human being? Tough question.
From his DNA must link to someone though, doesn't it?
Yep.
It must do. If he's got DNA, then it has to link to someone else. Your DNA is encoded with your parents.
Exactly.
So it'd have to come from.
Yeah. So they're gonna look at other people's DNA. They're gonna look up the DNA of Mary, and they're gonna say that's the mother. then they're going to look for the closest genetic similarity from her family, which is going to be a man, and they're going to say that's the father. Even though theoretically, God can do a miracle. So for us, Adam is a miracle, but it doesn't mean we can discover it using science. And the thing is, what's important to know is this. This new atheist narrative, well, I know you're not a new atheist, you're just an atheist. The new atheist narrative that evolution undermines design, undermines God, this is not something which makes any sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Bring it closer to yourself.
So yeah. So evolution from that standpoint, it's obviously it talks about the it doesn't. So it's more to do with abiogenesis. Abiogenesis, I believe, is the
origin of life.
It's the origin of life, but evolution is how things came to be, how the progression of life.
Yeah.
So how single organisms.
You know your stuff.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I watch a lot of YouTube. I've got nothing else to do in my life. So I don't agree with that theory at all. Evolution doesn't undermine God 1%. It just tells us how we got here. It doesn't tell us what the origin is, how life started. So there's a lot of theories behind that, but there's no concrete evidence. I don't think there ever will be, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
Apart from the God theory, maybe. I don't think there ever will be.
Yeah.
Definitive answer. So.
And the thing is, God is somebody, God as a concept is something which cannot be negated using evolutionary theory, physics theory, or any other theory. And the most important thing for us to realize is that ultimately, science can go hand in hand with God. How? Science is an explanation, attempt to explain how the world works. It doesn't mean it gets rid of why. How and why are two different things. So for example, I can explain how this camera works. This camera works by this particular mechanism, this electrical circuit. But by explaining how the camera works, does that mean there's no design of the camera? No. So that's how and why in terms of science. What's your thoughts on that?
So this goes to the watchmaker analogy. That's similar to the watchmaker analogy. If there was a watch on a beach, you would have seen that it's got a designer. The watchmaker analogy is also good. I wouldn't say it's as strong as the Kalam cosmological argument. But the problem with that watchmaker analogy for me is that it makes an exception for God, because obviously then God doesn't have a creator, does he? So then, what created God? And a lot of theists would then say, well, God is eternal, God never had a creator. But then for me, from a philosophical perspective, it creates problems because, for example, Islamically, God is omnipotent and he's omniscient, so he knows everything. If a creator has a creator and a creator has a creator and it all leads to God, then where did God get this information from?
Yeah, so this is the problem. This is the problem with the infinite regress, right? So the question, who designed the designer? The first thing about the question is that it doesn't deny a designer. All it does is it asks us, what is the nature of the designer? Is the designer designed or undesigned? That's all it does. Okay. Now we as Muslims, we would say the designer is undesigned. The designer is without a cause. Now philosophically, we can support this. How? Because if you have an infinite regress of past events, you'll never have a beginning. So if the past went back forever, we'll never have this conversation. That's the way we would address it. But this also shows the limits of philosophy, because like you said, kalam, design, contingency, these can prove to us that it makes sense there's some creator, but it does not go an inch to who the creator is, what the creator wants, what the purpose of life is. So I want to end upon another point. I want to ask you about, you're 40 now, close to 40 years old, and obviously life goes past very quickly, right? What do you think about the question of the meaning or the purpose of life? Is that something that bothered you throughout your life?
So, the meaning of life question is one of the biggest questions that we have. So the meaning of life for me, it's hard to pin down because obviously from an atheistic perspective there isn't really an answer. You could say the answer is just to reproduce, just to live and die. That could be one of the answers.
It's not very satisfying.
Exactly, it's not satisfying, but that doesn't necessarily prove it to be wrong either.
Yeah, of course.
Just because something isn't satisfying and there's a more satisfactory answer out there, that doesn't mean that everyone should adopt that answer necessarily. It doesn't make that answer correct, which is the idea is that we should worship God to attain Jannah and an eternal paradise. Which to me obviously sounds a lot more appealing than just trying
But we have to look at the evidence for it.
Huh?
You have to look for the evidence for it.
Exactly, this is the problem for me. So the question of meaning of life is it's very problematic for me. I'm just taking every day as it goes, to be honest. Like I said to you, I want to know as many true things as possible and as many false things as possible. Another thing for me is happiness. I'm just reading the book right now about happiness. How we measure happiness. I want to be as happy as I can. I want to be as happy as I can, and I want to make sure I reduce suffering as much as I can as well.
Those are good goals
for me in my life.
Those are good goals. Are you aware of what the purpose of life in Islam is?
So it's to worship God?
Yeah. So we believe, and like you said, firstly, I totally agree with you. Just because the atheist answer is not satisfying doesn't mean it's not true, right? So what it basically is this. The purpose of life in Islam is to worship God. Now, what does worship mean? Worship means your love, hope, fear, submission, everything is for God. This life is a test, meaning we go through good and bad and everything we go through, ultimately, we're going to go back to God. And the most important thing, like I said in the beginning, is if you're sincere, then God will guide you. So it's not just got to do with philosophical arguments. Now, from what I've seen, you're very well read, you're very intelligent, you're understanding everything. But what I would advise you to do is to pray for guidance, because ultimately it's that connection with God which guides you. It's not philosophical arguments. That's my sort of last message I wanted to give you.
I appreciate that. I consider myself to be an honest person, a sincere person. I have sincerely looked for answers. Like I said as well earlier, I do plan to read the Quran once I've done enough reading the Bible, because I don't want to reject a particular faith without giving it a good, without giving it as much time and effort as I can to understand its points and see where it leads me. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
So good, thank you. So that's a copy of the Quran. That's what's it called? Short verses from the Quran. That's evidence from what I spoke to you about before, why the Quran is the word of God. You've seen some of these things already online about prophecies, about preservation, about these things. That's in more detail. And if you have any more questions, I'll give you my number and we'll be in contact. Any last message you want to give to people watching?
No, I'd say thank you for having a talk. I really like the stuff that you do on your channel. Keep doing it. It's really good. I love the open dialogue that we have. And yeah, that's it. Really. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. So let me see if I can get Ali to give you this book. This is really good. Do you read a lot?
I'm reading a book now. I don't know if you've heard of it. I was reading it on the way here.
Oh yeah.
Homo Deus. So there's two versions of this book. There's Homo
Deus. It's got real chip.
Is it a real chip?
I mean, it looks like a...
It could be, It could be a real chip, yeah. A brief history of tomorrow, and there's another version, a brief history of the past.
Yeah, and there's also 21 lessons for the 21st century.
The same author?
Same author. That's his latest book. I obviously read this stuff a lot, so... It's really good speaking to you. I've got your number. I'll drop you a WhatsApp. If you have any questions, let me know. Next time we can hopefully talk without so much noise in the background.
I can't stand this one, honestly. It's just so obnoxious.
But this is also, I think, one of the reasons why people turn away from religion. It's the misbehavior of religious people, which we all can do, but people get put off, because there's only a limited amount of patience you have.
Don't you think burnout's a thing as well? Is where you can learn so much about one particular subject, it just burns you out, and you just become disillusioned with it.
I think that is something, I wouldn't call it burnout, I'd call it misdirected. Because religion, like the Islamic religion, is all about moderation. But when some people become a bit extreme, they eventually burn out and leave the religion. That does happen a lot. But I would say that's misdirected understanding of Islam. It does happen, you know, some people become Muslim and they're like very, very strict, and then they can't keep it up. But everything's about having some form of moderation. Because human beings, you know, if you go to run the marathon tomorrow, you'll fail.
You need to train. You need to train. You need to acclimate.
Exactly.
Yourself. You need to take steps.
Exactly. And that's what religion's about. And the most important thing, like I said to you, is sincerity. As long as you're sincere, God makes everything easy. Do you want to go for coffee?
You must be to some other people, so...
Okay, no problem.
Thanks for talking to me.
It's great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Sir, I heard you were talking about how Islam perfect.